Florence, 15th century. A city of stone towers, crowded markets, ringing church bells, and restless ambition. Merchants argued over silk prices in narrow streets, while artists painted visions that would redefine civilization itself. Beneath the beauty, however, another force was quietly taking shape, one far more powerful than armies or kings. Money. And at the center of this transformation stood a single family. The Medici, a dynasty so influential that historians still debate whether they were bankers, kings without crowns, or the architects of the modern financial world itself. Because long before Wall Street, before central banks, before multinational finance, the Medici family discovered something revolutionary. Control the flow of money, and you control the flow of power. This is the story of how a modest merchant family from Florence built a financial empire that reshaped Europe, funded the Renaissance, manipulated popes and princes, and ultimately helped invent the foundations of modern banking itself. But it is also a story of corruption, conspiracy, assassination, and collapse. Because every financial empire eventually discovers the same brutal truth. The higher you rise through money, the more dangerous the world becomes. The Medici story begins not with kings, but with instability. In medieval Europe, commerce was exploding. Trade routes stretched from England to the Ottoman Empire. Silk, spices, gold, wool, and precious metals moved constantly between cities. But there was one enormous problem. Money itself was chaos. Every kingdom issued different coins. Values changed constantly. Counterfeiting was everywhere. Transporting physical gold across Europe was dangerous and painfully inefficient. Merchants could lose fortunes simply moving wealth from one city to another. Europe desperately needed a safer financial system, and Florence was perfectly positioned to create one. By the early 1300s, Florence had become one of Europe's great commercial centers. Its wealthy merchant class understood trade better than many kings understood warfare. Banking families like the Bardi and Peruzzi had already grown powerful by lending money across Europe. But in the 1340s, disaster struck. England's King Edward III defaulted on massive loans taken from Florentine banks to fund his wars against France. The Bardi and Peruzzi banking houses collapsed almost overnight, dragging much of Florence into financial crisis. It was one of history's earliest major banking crashes, and from the ruins emerged opportunity. A lesser-known family named Medici watched carefully. The real architect of the dynasty was Giovanni di Medici. Born in 1360, Giovanni understood something many others did not. Reckless lending to kings could destroy even the richest banks. Instead of gambling everything on monarchs, he built his business slowly and carefully. He focused on reliability, trust, efficiency, and most importantly, innovation. Giovanni expanded the Medici Bank across Europe, with branches in Rome, Venice, Geneva, Bruges, and London. But the true genius of the Medici system wasn't simply opening branches. It was changing how money moved. One of their greatest innovations involved the widespread use of bills of exchange, financial documents that allowed merchants to transfer money between cities without physically carrying gold. A merchant in Florence could deposit funds with the Medici Bank and withdraw equivalent value in London. Today, that sounds ordinary. At the time, it was revolutionary. The Medici reduced risk, accelerated trade, and transformed banking into an international network, rather than a local vault. Modern banking had begun. But banking alone wasn't enough. The Medici understood another principle that still defines finance today. Money must connect itself to power. In 1410, Giovanni secured one of the family's most important relationships when the Medici Bank became deeply connected to the papacy. Managing church finances gave the family extraordinary influence across Europe. The Vatican needed bankers. The Medici became indispensable, and with influence came wealth beyond imagination. By the time Giovanni died in 1429, the Medici Bank had become one of the most respected financial institutions in Europe. But his son, Cosimo de Medici, would transform the family from wealthy bankers into the unofficial rulers of Florence itself. Cosimo wasn't a king. He didn't wear a crown. But he understood political power better than most monarchs. Florence officially operated as a republic, yet wealth controlled everything behind the scenes. Through loans, alliances, favors, and strategic influence, Cosimo slowly positioned the Medici family at the center of Florentine politics. He funded public projects, supported religious institutions, helped influential families financially, and carefully built loyalty everywhere. His enemies saw the danger immediately. In 1433, rival elites arrested Cosimo and accused him of trying to dominate Florence. He was imprisoned inside the Palazzo Vecchio and nearly executed. For a moment, the Medici story almost ended before it truly began. But Cosimo's wealth had already woven itself deeply into the city's fabric. Powerful allies intervened. Bribes reportedly changed hands. Public pressure mounted. Instead of execution, Cosimo was exiled. Yet even exile failed to weaken him. Within a year, Florence collapsed into political instability without Medici financial support. Trade suffered. Confidence weakened. The economy faltered. The city realized something terrifying. The Medici had become too financially important to remove. Cosimo returned triumphantly in 1434. From that moment onward, the Medici effectively ruled Florence for decades. But their greatest weapon wasn't fear. It was patronage. Cosimo understood that culture itself could become an investment. The Medici financed churches, libraries, architecture and scholars. Most famously, they became patrons of Renaissance artists, whose work would define Western civilization forever. Without Medici money, the Renaissance may never have flourished the way it did. They supported Brunelleschi, whose engineering genius created Florence Cathedral's massive dome, an achievement considered impossible at the time. They funded Donatello, Botticelli, and later, Michelangelo himself. Art became political influence. Beauty became financial branding. The Medici transformed wealth into legacy. And under Lorenzo de Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, the family reached the absolute height of its power. Lorenzo inherited not just money, but a city shaped around Medici dominance. Intelligent, charismatic, and politically brilliant, he turned Florence into the cultural capital of Europe. Poets, philosophers, artists, and diplomats crowded his court. But beneath the glamour, enemies multiplied. The Medici had accumulated immense wealth and influence, and powerful rival families feared them. Among the most dangerous rivals were the Pazzi family. What followed became one of the most shocking assassination attempts in Renaissance history. The Pazzi Conspiracy. April 26, 1478. Inside Florence Cathedral during Sunday Mass, assassins attacked Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano de Medici in front of an entire congregation. Giuliano was stabbed repeatedly and killed on the cathedral floor. Lorenzo escaped wounded. The conspiracy had support from powerful political figures, including members connected to Pope Sixtus IV, who opposed growing Medici influence. But the attack backfired catastrophically. Florence erupted in fury against the conspirators. The public, deeply tied to the Medici through economics and patronage, turned violently against the Pazzi family. Conspirators were executed publicly. Some were thrown from palace windows. Others were hunted through the streets. The Medici emerged even stronger. And yet, hidden beneath the family's magnificence was a dangerous weakness. The bank itself was beginning to rot. The Medici had mastered political influence, but political ambition slowly corrupted financial discipline. Branch managers became careless. Loans grew riskier. Oversight weakened. Lorenzo himself focused more on politics and culture than banking operations. The family that once avoided reckless royal lending gradually drifted toward the same mistakes that destroyed earlier Florentine banks. And then came another problem. No financial empire escapes. Succession. After Lorenzo died in 1492, the family lost its stabilizing genius. His son Piero de' Medici lacked political skill entirely. Just 2 years later, French King Charles VIII invaded Italy. Piero surrendered key Florentine territories without resistance, humiliating the city. Furious citizens expelled the Medici family from Florence in 1494. Their palaces were looted. Their political system collapsed. And Florence briefly turned toward the radical religious rule of Girolamo Savonarola, a Dominican friar who condemned wealth, luxury, and corruption. Savonarola organized the infamous Bonfire of the Vanities, where citizens burned books, cosmetics, paintings, and luxury goods in public squares. The city that once celebrated Renaissance brilliance now rejected excess entirely. But radicalism proved unstable. Savonarola himself was eventually executed in 1498. And over time, the Medici returned once again. Because even after exile, their network of money and influence remained vast. The family adapted. Some Medici became popes. Leo X, Clement VII. Others became dukes and rulers across Italy and France. Catherine de' Medici even became Queen of France and played a major role in European politics during the 16th century. The dynasty survived far beyond Florence itself. But the original Medici Bank never fully recovered. Competition intensified, management weakened, political entanglements grew expensive. And eventually, the institution that once dominated European finance faded into decline. Yet, the Medici legacy never truly disappeared, because the systems they helped pioneer became the blueprint for modern capitalism itself. International banking networks, branch banking, credit systems, currency exchange, political financing, financial influence over governments. Even the idea that private wealth could shape entire societies traces directly through Renaissance Florence and the Medici experiment. In many ways, the modern financial world still operates on principles they refined 600 years ago. But perhaps the most important Medici lesson has nothing to do with money itself. It's about perception. The Medici understood that finance alone is never enough to sustain power. Wealth must attach itself to culture, politics, religion, and public identity. People rarely follow money directly. They follow the systems money builds around them. The Medici funded beauty while consolidating influence. They sponsored art while expanding financial control. They appeared as protectors of civilization while quietly shaping its power structures from behind the scenes. And that duality still exists today.